Hello, I'm your host Jim McClean. Welcome back to another episode of the Bandaflix Movie Review Show here on NvTv. Let's see what movies we'll be talking about tonight. Ahead of the US presidential election, we'll be reviewing The Apprentice, which is out in cinemas now. Our pick of the screens is Anna Kendrick's directorial debut, Woman of the Hour, available to watch on Netflix. And we'll wrap up with our DVD of the week, Despicable Me 4. So that's what we've lined up for you this week. Apologies, viewers, I am bunged with the cold, or should I say, more worryingly, man flu. But I think for the next half hour, I'll power through. I'm just back in the seat. I don't want to go anywhere just yet. And joining me on this week's show is blogger Alan Meban.
Hi, and I'm going to keep on this side of the studio in case I catch your germs.
Alan, you are going to go and don a mask, and while we do that, let's have a look at some movie news.
2 more minutes. Thanks. Hey. Oh my. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
I love you.
I love you too.
I'll be right back. Fire! Engine 1!
So that's a look at a bit of classic Tom Hanks. Alan, in Castaway. We all cried for Wilson when they were separated in that movie. That's not too much of a spoiler. But Robert Zemeckis has been out doing the promo tour for his latest film and his latest collab with Tom Hanks. Here, we don't get to see it until January next year. We've that to look forward to. Digitally de-aged Tom Hanks. Who knew we needed it? The early reviews are not great. But Zemeckis has been out and he's made the point that nowadays, in 2024 and beyond, he would struggle to get a film like Castaway, like Forrest Gump, not just into cinemas, but just made and kind of encouraging streamers, etc., to pick on these projects. Now, I disagree maybe with that latter point, because there's a lot of stuff goes on streamers that we sometimes worry, like, why did this get greenlit? But for you, I mean, we've seen a lot of flops this year. We've just had Joker Folie à Deux. It's hitting premium VOD services this week as we record. But what's your thoughts on this? I mean, Forrest Gump, Castaway, these are beloved films. Forrest Gump, an Oscar-winning film. And here we have a director like Zemeckis saying, I might not get to make these type of films anymore because of the way the market's going.
Well, I suppose, in a sense, if the commercial model for streamers is kind of all about trying to get bang for their buck. So they really want to see, if they think it's going to be kind of a niche hit, that it'll fill, kind of fills the number of hours that they have. They will commission things that are relatively cheap to make, lots of action films, lots of things that are kind of bank heist things, and those all seem to get commissioned, and there's 10 a dozen of them. Now, it's the really big, audacious kind of plots that are the dodgy ones, the ones that could either go really well or could die and we never hear again. Now, you could kind of argue back and say something like Poor Things. I mean, which may or may not actually have been it was probably an art house kind of cinema success. It did well in terms of awards. It may not have actually had kind of just the millions and millions of people who'll go and see Dune or will go and see some of those kind of big hits. But it was something that really on paper shouldn't have worked. But the director has a history and is able to kind of sell it. I think we also kind of see some other films at the moment where the director is basically producing and funding the entire thing, and those are particular flops. So I don't know. I really hope that people would really think that there's like 3 films out of 4 might work. So this should actually take a risk. The business model isn't everything has to be a success, because you can't kind of quite judge the mood. The politics of America probably plays a lot into what audiences want to see on the screen when they're wanting to be entertained. And that could change over the next year. You know, we've got an election coming up a couple of days after we go out. That could change how people feel.
It is funny you make that point, because earlier this year we had Alien Romulus out in the cinemas. That was originally just going to be made for a streaming service. It was just going to be dumped onto that. I know it's not probably the right term to use, but it's went into the cinemas, been a huge hit. So you never know. We have had some surprises this year. I know a couple of weeks ago we talked about Joker Folie à Deux. Whether you're a fan of it, Alan, or not, we'll not probably have time to go into that. But there is a film that its predecessor, huge box office success. They tried to do something very different, which I admire, almost have respect for, and it just hasn't worked, and it hasn't worked with audience. And now there's another title that is dropping on premium VOD services for £20. You can watch that movie at home. But it is worrying when we start to see those films that we classify as beloved classics, Back to the Future, Castaway, Forrest Gump, Robert Zemeckis.
Would Star Wars get made today? Probably the original one wouldn't.
Well, we don't know. It's the risk factor. It's when you start to view film as product as opposed to art, and that gets into a worrying debate. And unfortunately, I bring it up because we were just looking through the movie news just before we started to record, and it caught my attention. We are going to move on to something closer to home. This week saw the return of the Belfast Film Festival. It's opening early this week with Ashling Clark's latest directorial offering, Free Walk, if I'm getting that right. Alan, you're a man I know that will be probably going to about 3 or 4 screenings a day at the Belfast Film Festival. I have a couple that I've picked out. Night Bitch is one, but what are the movies that are catching your eye that you're going to be seeking out during the festival's runtime?
Well, I think on the Wednesday night, The Unholy Lands is probably one of those unmissable kind of theatre events. Hopefully, from a cinema point of view, that gets a wider release in a while. It's got Jimmy Nesbitt attached to it. Expect cameos from Nathan Carter as well. A homegrown comedy based in the Holy Lands. The kind of student digs up near Queen's University. 2 lads are going to have a party. The father finds out and threatens to kind of shut the whole thing down. What could go wrong? Can they keep control? For me, it's part of the kind of the local. It's part of the local mythology, what goes on in the Holy Lands, much to the chagrin of the actual residents who live there year in, year out and want to actually make a life. So it would just be interesting to see how that plays out, whether it is funny, whether it is kind of art imitating life too much, and what we can get out of it. A couple of other things that took my eye. Paul and Paulette Take a Bath, which I nearly say just for the sheer wonder of the title. It's about a kind of like a young Parisian who seems to kind of, I don't know, he visits the sites of gruesome events and puts himself in the mind of the people who were going through those gruesome things. And so Marie Antoinette, the guillotine is about to fall, and he is in her mind thinking what's happening, and he catches the eye of a woman. And romance strangely comes out of this, just purely for either the title or the kind of
You're
synopsis.
selling this.
I think
You're selling this
that's
to me.
interesting. And maybe another one, if we go back to politics, because the presidential election is there, rumours on the Tuesday night, so the night of the election count, a skewering, apparently, hilarious skewering of the G7 forum.
Those are 2 words that don't normally go together, Alan.
No, but apparently we have all these international heads of state who are dunces, who would have thought, and we have the German Chancellor, played by Kate Blanchett, and they're in some kind of custom-built gazebo, trying to solve world crisis, discussing sundials, and then a kind of a fog comes in and there's a bit of a zombiness that happens. Not so big in the zombiness for me, but I'm intrigued by the idea that we could have some kind of satire or perhaps just a humorous take on politics on a global scale, and it's a good night to do it as well. I think there'll be an audience for that.
Yeah, that is one of the other titles that has caught my eye. Purely from the trailer, I would recommend any of our viewers seek that out. It's one of those films I fear could either be fantastic or terrible. We're going to have to wait and see. Neither of us have seen it yet. We don't know, and not just like that, we don't know what way the election is going to go at this point when we are recording, but we will move on and keep, as I say, of sorts on that theme with this week's big release.
Yes.
Hello, this is Donald Trump from Mr. Cohn. Thank you so much.
Donald who?
Roy Cohn, nice to meet you.
The Roy Cohn from all the papers. Yeah, you're brutal.
Guilty as charged. Roy Cohn is a crook. He's been indicted 3 times.
I'm gonna let you in on a little secret.
People, they hire me because I'm a winner.
How do you win?
The first rule is the simplest. Attack, attack, attack.
It's gonna be the finest building in the country. In the world. It's gonna be spectacular.
So that's a look at The Apprentice, as I say, at sorts, looking at the Republican candidate as we record for the presidential election. We don't know what way the White House is going to go, the race to the White House is going to go. So this is not really a biography about Trump. This, for me anyway, from watching the film, from looking at the trailer, is, and I say this, I guess there is a political tinge to what I'm saying, I will be as balanced as I can, the birthing of the political monster that we know. There is the kind of the Frankenstein's construction as he comes under the tutelage and eventual betrayal of Roy Cohn, who he's working with in this. I have issues with, not with the film, but the fact that not the film exists, but who this film was made for. I do want to come back to that, and I know Donald Trump himself has been quite nasty on Truth Social with his truths, which sounds wrong saying that out loud, but he's been quite vocal about his objections and issues with some of the film, some of the content within the film. But Alan, what did you think? Because with your attachment with Slugger O'Toole, you are from political backgrounds as well, so there must be invested interest for you there.
I was intrigued to go and see this. It feels like at least a week ago. Because, I mean, in a sense, it is the origin story of Trump the businessman, who then became Trump the politician. And there's this kind of figure of, I mean, much of it seems to be based on real testimony, some of it based on his own words, his own writing, some of it from court documents, which the Trump side of the house would like to say were not necessarily true. However, in court, what was in the testimony wasn't actually challenged, so that comes out. But what we really see is this kind of interesting thing of a young adult who is trying to impress his father, who obviously is quite a ruthless kind of businessman. He falls in with this kind of Roy Cohn, played by Jeremy Strong, who's, I suppose, a lawyer who can make things happen, who knows how to bend rules, and who teaches him the 3 rules, which he then will use for the rest of his life. And we kind of see that kind of ad nauseum as we go on. I quite enjoyed the film in a very strange way, because it didn't upset me. It wasn't this hatchet job. And in many ways, I felt sorry for many of the people who are around him. I mean, it's that classic thing of the teacher's student eats the teacher. It comes back to bite. And actually that was quite, by the end of the film, when we see kind of Roy Cohn, if you like, coming to the end of his journey, and we see Trump kind of powering through, we kind of realise, yeah, this is going to happen again and again. And that is one of the lessons that I think we apply to his last presidential term, in terms of some of his advisors and things who kind of went through a bit of a washing machine and came out the far end and then got steamrollered. So it's a good film. I think it's a film that should be seen. I guess more people probably in the UK have seen it than in America. It seems to have a very small release over there. It's much more problematic to distribute in the country, whereas in Europe it's getting a wider release. And in a sense, it doesn't actually matter for us to really understand this character, because there is no vote for this man over here.
No, we can just look over, and I guess it's whatever way your political leaning is towards Donald. I guess you're going to be decided. But this is where I come to that point. I like the film. I think it does what it does. I don't think it's a hatchet job. I don't think it's an attempt to deliberately discredit him. I know he would kind of talk differently on his social media platform, but he is available back on X, etc. But he is discredited. I know the sequence, particularly you mentioned with Ivana Trump, he has taken a lot of issue with that, as you say, comes from court documentation, and it is an upsetting sequence. And you see it, but then we know that about this man's character from the more recent times with the presidency, grabbing places that we really don't want to, and I don't want to get into it because it just makes me feel grubby. But my issue, I guess, and I know we only have a certain amount of time, Alan, to talk about this, we have 2 other films we want to discuss, is that sense, who would this film be made for? Because Trump supporters are not going to want to see this, I would imagine, because they will want to go see the Lifetime production where it's, you know, the glorious light, and he is the person who will eventually, not just, I guess at this time, the one term in the White House, possibly a second. People that are against Donald Trump would sit and go, well, why do I want to go and spend 90 minutes seeing about someone I dislike? I still think it's an important film. I know as we record, we've already mentioned about Joker Folie à Deux going to this premium VOD service, whatever you want to refer to, PVOD. The Apprentice is doing the same from the 1st of November. So it hasn't found a massive box office. But I guess we're almost clever than, well, I'm more clever than I think. We started the show by talking at this point. Here we are again talking about this film being screened at Cannes, lukewarm reviews. It's, as you say, has been...
There's a long tail for this film. I mean, this tale, it's a bit like a documentary, except it is a fictionalized version of a real person. But people will want to go and see this in 10 years' time. This will come back round again. It will get shown on TV. It will get shown in cinemas because they'll be wanting to understand what was that man like. Donald Trump at his death when he is 123, because he will have the greatest life ever. But you know, people will want to come back to this and say, so what was that? What was he like as a 20, 30-year-old? And this will be one of the things that can be brought out to say, well, based on things that were written at the time and biographies and what he had said and what other people said, here's a version of what he looked like. And I think that's, I mean, so some films are made for the now, and there's probably a Democratic, anti-Republican audience. There's also a kind of a European audience, and possibly everywhere else in the world except America, who might want to be curious about this. But there's also a long-term audience that says, actually, give us an artifact that says what was he like and what were people thinking about him if they wanted to kind of attack him at the time. I think my only thing is it wasn't actually an attack. This was not an assassination job. This is relatively calm and tame. You could have made a much, much worse edit of the existing film, never mind adding extra information into it. And it's a very fixed time period. It's only a couple of years of his life that actually we're looking at. And then he has years and years and years going on afterwards. And
the last thing I'll say before we move on, I would not be surprised to see Jeremy Strong nominated, if not taking home an Oscar next year. Yes, so as we say, that is out in cinemas at the minute, but it will be available to watch PVOD within a couple of days of this episode going out. And with that, let's move to this week's Pick of the Streams.
I've been on this show since 1968. The one thing I've learned is, no matter what words they use, the question beneath the question remains the same.
What's the question?
Which one of you will hurt me?
And Bachelor number 3, I'm counting on you. What are girls for?
So that's a look at Women of the Hour. Alan, do you want to give our viewers a little bit of setup for this just before we get into discussing this? Because this is a remarkable story. And before I even let you set the premise up, were you familiar with this story before we asked you this week to review the film?
I wasn't. And that feels quite bad, that this kind of story hasn't been in the public consciousness, though maybe in America it is greater. Basically, if you can imagine Cilla Black's Blind Date, it is the same format. The format existed in a couple of different countries. It's called The Dating Game when it was in the US. We're talking about 1978, and it's the usual thing of three stooges, suitors, behind a wall. They answer the questions from their potential date. She asks crazy questions. They give innuendos as the answers. One lucky person gets to go on a funny holiday or a funny trip with these people, and they come back the next week and say how it was. The problem was in 1978, an actress had been kind of put up for this by her agent who was trying to get her work, and she was the one asking the questions. She is much smarter than the average person asking the questions, and that she's Cheryl Bradshaw was the real life person, played by Anna Kendrick. And one of the guys behind the thing turned out to be a serial killer, and he had probably killed at least 5 people by then. And in a sense, the film is split in two, but kind of chopped up. And so we see this character killing people, killing women, and then we see the gradual story of Cheryl going to the dating game, and then kind of what happens after that. Won't spoil the ending. for me, I kind of wanted to start. I went into this kind of watching it and going, do we really need another film, another bit of TV that is about women being killed? Because kind of femicide, from The Fall, probably in particular, was very much seen as nearly kind of femicide porn. It was the idea of, let's have these gruesome scenes of women without too many clothes getting killed by somebody who's a bit of a hunk, and we'll all go, ooh, isn't that nice drama? So this, in a sense, manages not to play into that stereotype. I have to kind of feel that Anna Kendrick coming on, not only as the actress, but as the director, after she was associated with the thing, has maybe helped. There is very much a female view to all of this, and so we are a female kind of gaze to all of this, because I suppose we see a little bit of what happens when the serial killer strikes, but we don't have to linger on it. We see him starting, and then we see the end, and then we move on to the next thing. And in a sense, that is a much nicer way of doing it. This is a real story, and the number of women that he may have killed, it's difficult to fathom, because he was kind of, if you like, he was done for a small number, but actually it was a much larger number.
Over 100, I think, from the
well over 100, if you were to kind of, if everything fell into place. And the questions that come out of this are not as to how would a poor young girl get into this situation in the first place. The questions really are kind of quite subtly asked, but they're about, how did the police, how did those who are investigating these kind of things, who eventually found this guy, bit of a spoiler, but he was picked up at various points and released and went on to do more. How did that happen? How were the red flags that were pretty obvious, if this kind of depiction is anything to go by, not seen? It's kind of really interesting. The Rodney, who is the serial killer played by Daniel Zovato, is kind of an unlikable character. In many ways, not played. He is not a Jamie Dornan kind of look and feel to him. I think it was an interesting film, particularly a bit like the last one. It didn't disappoint me, and I expected to be quite disappointed by it.
From the very start, if people find themselves in that these things can be triggering, it does start pretty grimly in the opening moments of Women of They Are, and then it moves on. There is a sequence in this film that has stayed with me I've watched this nearly a week ago, and it's when we go to the aforementioned dating game. There's a woman in the audience who recognises this person, knows what she went to the police, she finds herself traumatised, she has to step out, she goes in and says, I need to speak to the producers. The guy says, oh, go up to room, whatever it is, and speak to Alan. That person turns out to be the janitor. And it just, if ever there was a sequence, I think, just summed up, I think, the whole contents of this film, the kind of the way that for so long, it wasn't treated with the correct way. Maybe that's not the right way to put it, but there's just that sequence has stayed with me in that sense of maybe it's because of the world we're in right now, and particularly here in Northern Ireland with the way things are going.
And this is a film that is being made for this time, about that time. It's one of those things that people obviously reckoned it would have a resonance, which is why the money has gone in to make it.
Yeah.
If we kind of keep harking back to the earlier thing, this is a very intelligently made film that I'm a funny feeling that if we put 10 male directors at it, we would have got probably 9 of them would have made a very, very different movie. And I'm really glad that actually this one is female-led, because I think it's a much better film.
Yeah, and again, as shocking as it is, it never allows itself to get into sensationalism. Our serial killer is creepy. There's a sequence, again, it's not too much of a spoil. I think it's in the trailer where Anna Kendrick's character, and they're walking together in a car park at different sides of the car, and it's really well done. Comes back to what you mentioned with Saoirse Ronan, and also stick around for the credits, because there's some, as we've mentioned, alluded to, some startling facts. Great film, really enjoyed it, if that's the right way to use that. Really good film, really interested to see where Anna Kendrick goes next. And then on that note, we will move from the digital stream to the good old days of physical media. So that's a look at the trailer for Despicable Me 4. Alan, if ever there was a tonal change on a show, I think we have definitely went, a bit of a detour. So here we have the fourth installment in this franchise. I don't know about you. I had forgotten there was a third installment. I know there has been a couple of Minions movies, but nevertheless, Gru and the Minions are back. This time they are going up against Gru's former nemesis that we never knew from previous films, played by Will Ferrell. At the start of the film, he's imprisoned, eventually escapes from prison, and there's a bit of backstory from when they were children. So, I guess is there much to be said about Despicable Me 4? It's out in DVD, it's still in cinemas. These movies, we've talked about it ad nauseum in this week's episode, they make a lot of money for studios, so it's unsurprising we have a fourth installment, probably going to be a fifth, maybe a sixth. We'll probably have another Minions movie. I didn't really like it that much. I thought it was fine. It did what it did. It's Ron Seal movie. The Minions are funny. I laugh sometimes. But I've seen better animated movies this year than this. But yeah, it is what it is. I'm not the target audience. Alan, I feel that maybe I'm surprised you not have Minions socks or anything on. I could see you being a fan of the Minions, but are you a fan of Despicable Me 4?
I do like the puerile humour of the little yellow fellas. They are quite fun. I think you've been very kind to this film. I think in your demolition of it there, you could have been much, much worse. This is a terrible movie. This is a movie that should be left on the shop floor in its DVD case and not picked up. Do not waste your time going to the cinema to see it unless you have some very, very young children and it is a very, very wet day and you're very, very desperate, but there's nearly anything else. Watching paint dry would be better than this. There's just something very strange about the story and its lack of excitement, its lack of jeopardy, even though they go through various escapades that are meant to be kind of putting people at risk, but it just doesn't feel at all scary. It's barely funny. The best character in it is one of the Minions who is actually trapped in a vending machine, and I kind of wish that you could press a button and join him, and actually I'm sure he told better jokes and had more fun in that vending machine than everybody else who went on this little adventure. There is a flying car in it, which reminds me of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, but also Penelope Pit Stop and the Wacky Races. But that still doesn't make it good.
You're showing your age, Alan. You're showing your age.
There's just so much about this that basically reminds you that the whole franchise peaked at Despicable Me 2 and should have finished there, unless, of course, you are a studio and you need to make money for your animation house, and this is the way to do it. I do hope there's another Minions film, because I think actually the little yellow people are so much better than the rest. But this kind of, it felt like the gum has been extended to such a point that it has snapped and nobody can actually get it back in their mouth. This should not have been made, and I regret the fact that I went to see it in the cinema about a month ago.
Well, the thing is, you say you regret and you don't think it should have been made, Alan. We come back to that depressing thing that we've talked about on this week's episode. It's made a lot of money at the box office. So clearly there's an audience there. Studios will be more than happy, I feel, to do Despicable Me 5. I need to go back and revisit Despicable Me 3. I completely forgot that film existed. And on an episode where we've talked about Donald Trump and we've talked about serial killers, I think talking about and finishing with Despicable Me 4, it's a nice little palate cleanser. It's a shame that you didn't enjoy the movie more. I didn't necessarily love it, but hey, it is what it is. I will laugh at the Minions. Gru, I wish, was funnier. But yeah, I guess if you are watching this and you have younger viewers there, if you don't have access to a streaming service, you pick this up on DVD, it'll do what it's designed to. It's cinematic babysitting.
It'll be on at Christmas on a year near here on a big TV show at 3 o'clock.
It'll be on at the Meban house over Christmas. So on that note, that's all we have time for. All that's left for me to do now is thank my guests. So thank you very much, Alan.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for watching at home. We'll be back next week with another episode. But for now, until then, goodbye.